Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the iPad Pro, the 4th generation or the 2020 model, depending on how you look at it. And let's just see how this specific iPad holds up in 2023. Now, what was very funny about this specific iPad was that a lot of people, including myself, thought that it was a pretty small upgrade coming from the previous generation. The 2018 iPad Pro was a massive upgrade coming from the 10.5-inch iPad Pro that came right before it. It brought a better display, it brought a better build quality USB-C, it brought kind of a better camera here and there, but that newer design with the lack of home button was the main selling point, I would say, of that specific iPad. Then about a year and a half later, we did end up getting the iPad Pro 11-inch. And with that type of iPad, that was a good iPad, I would say. They came in two different models, 11-inch and 12.9-inch model, but this was kind of almost like a stepping stone. This really wasn't a big update. It was just kind of refreshing a few things here and there, because the iPad right after this basically brought the M1 chipset back inside of these iPads. So essentially, this was almost like a middle child in a way. It was like an iPad that nobody really wanted to. I think people liked it, but I don't think people thought it was that big of an upgrade, especially because of some changes or some lack of changes that Apple made internally. So if you want to pick up some iPads, I would probably recommend buying this year. Links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPad Pro, this iPad came out in two different sizes, the 11-inch model and the 12.9-inch model. In this case, I did own the 11-inch model and I still own an 11-inch iPad Pro. In this case, it's the 2018 model, but the 2020 model is still very similar on the front. You were getting an IPS LCD display. The resolution was pretty high. 1668 by 2388. Very, very high resolution panel. 120 Hz display, so ProMotion. 600 nits of brightness, which is awesome. And it was a very, very good display. It really probably wasn't a big difference coming from the 2018 iPad Pro, but it was still a very good looking iPad. And again, when you get an iPad like something like this, it kind of, still looks very good, mostly because the newer iPads haven't really changed too much, but that's still a big asset that you have on an iPad like this. Now, you had a little bit of bezel around it, but, I personally didn't mind it too much. You had the flat sides on this iPad too, which was pretty nice. So definitely not, the curved sides or anything like that. And I definitely do think that's an awesome thing you have going here too. Now on the bottom, you have the USB Type-C port, which is great. So you can go ahead and dock it up to a different dock if you want to plug in a dongle, any accessories, anything like that. It was a standard USB-C port, so keep that in mind, no Thunderbolt, but it's still a very, very good, display port. But it's still a very, very good port for sure. And on the back, this is where things started changing up a little bit from the 2018 model to the 2020 model. You were getting that flat back, you were getting that Apple logo right in the center. But if you look, the camera module actually ended up changing a little bit. So this is where, and if you look at the current iPad Pro still, they still kind of have the same type of, camera layout. And it was basically like this, kind of like iPhone 11 Pro type of camera on this thing. It was missing a, telephoto lens, but you were still getting a LiDAR sensor here, which is pretty cool, and we'll talk about it all in a second. But it did look a little bit different than what the previous iPad brought, so I like this design change. I think this actually makes this iPad look way more modern than maybe some other iPads like the 2018 iPad Pro. But on the outside, that is really the only difference here. Of course, you're getting Apple Pencil 2 support, and you're getting a few things here and there, but all in all, they are pretty much the same type of thing when it comes down to it. So in terms of the outside, that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of the camera, like I mentioned before, you were getting that dual camera setup. So you were getting a 12 megapixel wide angle camera, and then you were getting a 10 megapixel ultra wide camera, and you were also getting that LiDAR sensor as well. Now, that camera setup, I would say, is actually pretty good. It's not a bad camera by any means. You're able to, basically, it's almost like an iPhone, it's like an iPhone 11 Pro camera minus the telephoto lens and minus 2 megapixels of the ultra wide camera. So with a sensor like this, you're able to film 4K at 60 on the back of this camera, which I think that in and of itself is very, very cool. You're also able to go ahead and get 1080p at 60 on the front. So resolution wise, it's almost the same thing as like an iPhone XS or iPhone XR, which is honestly not bad. And again, this iPad came out in 2020. It's been about 3 years since this iPad came out. So it's understandable that this thing wasn't like the most expensive or the craziest iPad camera you could get nowadays. But at that moment, it really wasn't that bad, to be honest. So if you were in a pinch and if you needed to go ahead and buy an iPad camera, this thing was pretty good and it was there for you if you wanted to go through it. So that's probably another thing to keep in mind there too. On top of that, with this type of iPad, you had that LiDAR sensor, so any accessories you wanted to use with it, it was there for you as well, which I think was pretty cool. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there as well. Now, in terms of the software and the longevity portion of this iPad, this is another one of those kind of complicated things because we really don't know how long this iPad's going to last. Internally, it kind of has the same chipset, I guess, a little bit as an iPhone XS, but it is also more powerful than it, so maybe it might be something like an iPhone 11. So we really don't know. It's kind of in the middle. It's like this really, really weird situation. So I would probably argue that this thing is probably going to last probably like at least like a year or two more than the 2018 iPad Pro. It might make sense because when you look at the years that this thing came out, oh, it's like 2 years newer, so it should last 2 years more. But because of the chipset, I mean, the chipset here was almost the same thing as the 2018 iPad Pro. It was like clocked a little bit higher, but for the most part, it was like the same chipset. They just kind of design changed the outside. So that's where these things kind of change up a little bit. It's honestly a very, very strange situation that this iPad kind of found itself in. So in terms of software, like it's still going to be supported. It's not going anywhere anytime soon, but it's just one of those things to keep in mind. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there as well. Now in terms of the performance, this thing internally had that Apple A12Z Bionic chip inside of it with 6 gigs of RAM on all the models available on the 11-inch model, but the 12.9-inch model did change up a few things here and there. And here's the thing about the performance of this iPad. It's still a very good performing iPad. It's still very, very strong. It can probably handle most things that you throw at it. And that's a beautiful thing. When you're getting an iPad like this, you want it to be as fast as possible. And that is one of my favorite things about this type of iPad. I love this thing. I mean, I love all my iPads like this. But the thing is that chipset inside, like I mentioned before, was very identical to what you were getting on the 2018 iPad Pro. Some things were changing here and there, but for the most part, you were basically getting the same type of device, So that's where, this type of iPad kind of seemed like a little bit of a stranger deal for the most part. But with this type of iPad, what I'll definitely tell you is that it's still pretty powerful. Whatever you're probably going to throw at it, it's going to be fine. Light applications are going to be perfectly fine. We all know this. Heavier intensive applications are also probably going to be good as well. But this was the stepping stone, like I mentioned, to the M1 chipset iPads. And those specific iPads did bring a lot of stuff to the table. And I truly do feel like those iPads really hit the nail in the coffin of what an iPad Pro should be. And with these ones using the same chipset as the iPhones, it did kind of seem like a little bit of a different type of device. But I do think with the iPad Pro 11-inch, I think overall the performance was pretty decent. And it still is a pretty decent performing iPad now. But to kind of sum up this video, what I'll tell you is, I definitely do think the iPad Pro is a very, very good deal if you can get it for like hundreds and hundreds of dollars cheaper than the M1 iPad Pro. But if you're still spending the same amount of money on this iPad as you did on like an M1 iPad Pro in the used market, there's really no reason to do that. The M1 iPad Pros have been out for a little bit of time now. They've already been, there's already a successor to them, which is the M2 iPad Pro. So it only makes sense to go ahead and buy those types of iPads than this 2020 iPad Pro as of right now. So there's a lot of choices up in the air, but that's kind of what I think. If you're planning on buying an iPad, this is probably the one I would, buy if you get it for a really good deal. Other than that, I would just recommend buying the M1 iPad Pros in the used market, or maybe even an M1 iPad Air, because those things are probably going to be better deals than this specific iPad. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.